good morning, and a warm welcome to the Future of Work for Women Summit. It is an honor to share this space with you all today. I'm really excited for all the new ideas, discussions, and potential collaborations between the academics, corporations, and grassroots organizations that we discussed today. We're all gathered here today to really understand how we can tackle this daunting challenge of bringing this large untapped potential of about 250 million women into the workforce. I'm Sakshi Shah, your compere for today. I've had the immense joy of working closely with Rohini Pande over the past 5 months, and more so over the past 5 months, to bring this summit together. I lead Myna USA, an organization with a mission to support programs and initiatives focused on increasing women's agency in urban resource-poor communities in India. To kick off this day, it is my honor to welcome on stage Dr. Rohini Pande, who is a fellow and founder of Mahila Foundation. As you all know, she's the force behind this entire summit. Rohini's relentless commitment to bridging gaps between academia and grassroots initiatives has been instrumental in bringing the summit to life. And joining her is Catherine Casey, Faculty Director of the King Center on Global Development here at Stanford. Her leadership, along with the support of the entire King Center team, have been foundational in orchestrating today's summit. Welcome, Rohini and Catherine.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm Kate Casey, the Faculty Director of the King Center, and we are so proud and honored to welcome you all here. The King Center is Stanford's hub on global development, so we have pitched a very large tent across the entire campus, so it covers all schools, all disciplines, all modes of inquiry, and we're united by this challenge of unlocking solutions to global poverty. So we work towards this goal with along three main fronts. So we fund cutting-edge research, we train the next generation of global leaders, and we help convene conversations and events on critical issues like the future of women in work that are key to promoting economic development around the world. So this event, for me, just totally embodies the spirit and ambition of the King Center and the things that we like to partner on. So, it starts with one person who has a bold idea, a vision, seeds a bunch of conversations across communities, across sectors, across stakeholders that have a very diverse set of experiences and intuition about what might be the problem and what might be the solution. And then, enabling these people with some funds and just a fantastic staff who work just way above and beyond the call of duty to make this happen. And of course, the person I'm talking about is Rohini. So I'm also a professor at the business school here, and Rohini was one of my MBA students, and she was in my classroom. And then I went to a PhD seminar for development economics, and there was Rohini, and I was like, I swear that's an MBA student. I was like, she's in my class. What is she doing here? Because MBA students generally do not take PhD classes. And then I find out not only is she an MBA student, she's a PhD student, which is totally rare and amazing. And now she's our colleague over at Hoover, so it's really fun to have her back and to be able to partner with her. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. It's just a killer lineup of speakers and discussions, and I'm really excited to be a small part of it. So Rani, take it away.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. This really feels surreal. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Sakshi, for making all of this happen. And thanks to the Hoover Institution for also really supporting this event. I feel like I'm surrounded here by my idols, by my friends and colleagues and people whose work I've really deeply admired over many, many years. And bringing everybody here today is really like a dream come true. We're here today with a shared goal: to align incentives across different sectors: government, private companies, civil society, academia, and funders, to create pathways that can help bring untapped productive talent back into the workforce. And as an employer myself through Mahila Foundation, which is a women's empowerment organization in India, employing about 80 people, I can deeply understand some of the challenges that employers actually face and experience in identifying and hiring productive talent. The war for talent is real, we know that. And yet, millions remain disconnected from productive opportunities. So today's discussion really focuses on women in South Asia because gender-based barriers significantly limit economic participation, particularly in this region. And addressing these gender-specific barriers will effectively unlock a huge amount of economic potential and talent for both employers and economies at large. And the numbers are actually quite staggering. We know hundreds of millions of women, in fact, I actually did not realize I could move this. I turned this off. Okay. Hundreds of millions of women are actually out of the workforce currently because this is not just a diversity and inclusion issue, but in fact, a huge business case for hiring and retaining women. So we know these numbers are really, really large, right? And we see that out of the 1.41 billion women that are currently of working age, about 60% are actually not in the workforce at the moment. So this is 930 million women globally. So with these staggering numbers, we know this is not a DEI, CSR issue alone. This is much bigger than that. It's fundamentally about harnessing economic potential to meet the critical workforce needs to drive economic growth. And today we will highlight solutions that not only show promise and identify gaps that currently persist, but also discuss the current state of evidence, the research on this, and where our understanding is still quite incomplete. Now, let me briefly just share with you why we started this Future of Work for Women initiative. Now, I strongly believe in the power of partnerships between academia and on-ground implementers. My journey started when I was 15, working in urban slum communities in India. And I've been doing this now for more than 15 years. Some of our incredible team members from the group and team that we started, Myna, Mahila, are here today. But when I first came to Stanford as a PhD student and for my doctorate and then now also as a Hoover Fellow at the Hoover Institution, it's really opened my eyes to not just the role that we play in academia, but also the responsibility to bridge conversations between academic research, think tanks, and boardrooms with the practical realities faced by employers and people on the ground. And today we're intentionally bringing together the thinkers and the doers, the people generating data and insights, and those applying those solutions directly on the ground. This initiative is really about harnessing the strengths of both academia and implementation and connecting, in this case at Stanford, Silicon Valley's innovation and technology and resources with these real-world ground-level insights and the feasibility of these practical, scalable solutions. Over the past year, as we've geared up towards this event, we've conducted extensive research and conducting some direct conversations with many private companies. And we've found a lot of insights from these conversations with companies that have actually formed the basis of a lot of the business case for hiring and retaining women that we will discuss later today. And I'm really thrilled to launch today our first research report, which captures these valuable insights from these private sector conversations, highlighting some of the effective solutions, identifying these potential opportunities, and also some pilot interventions that we could actually do along with different sectors to create the sort of cross-sector collaboration as part of this Future of Work for Women initiative. Copies of this report are available here. They're also available online. We really highly recommend that you check it out. And we want to get as many ideas from you as well to see how we could really make this cross-sector collaboration possible. We face a really large gap today, right now, between the employers that are currently hiring, say, even 10 million vacancies. These number of vacancies are often not even understood fully, to the women that are out of the workforce. And these, as we discussed globally, those numbers are very large, 900 million plus. We're looking at, in South Asia alone, somewhere about 250 million women. In India, 196 million women that are currently out of the workforce. Now, how do you really bridge this gap? Well, that's the role of a lot of the enablers in this space: the government, academia, civil society, funders, and startups, and if there's any other sectors that need to be involved in enabling this to happen. Today, we will be specifically discussing 5 practical solutions that we know have had some evidence and show some potential. These are, first, changing social norms around men's responsibilities around domestic and caregiving duties. 2, leveraging technology to create flexible work arrangements. 3 is reducing employment-specific costs for women. 4 is upskilling and educating women to enhance productivity. And 5 is establishing programs to lower childcare and transportation barriers. And these solutions have shown initial promise. One particular strategy that I want to highlight here, that we will be highlighting today as well and is highlighted in the report, is around the theme of today, women in the digital economy, how we can leverage technology for these flexible work arrangements. This is born out of some of the research that Lisa, who's here today, and I have also been doing, along with now many other scholars and academics who have been focused on understanding how flexible work arrangements can bring women into the workforce. We have Pragya, we have many other people here today who are also implementing and enabling the implementation of many of these solutions. There is growing evidence now that digital jobs not only help women enter the workforce, but can also serve as a stepping stone for broader career opportunities. And the Future of Work for Women initiative, and all of you here today in the Valley, are part of the solution. We have access to digital technologies, AI, resources, and knowledge that we can help use to bridge the gap with the people and the women that are out of the workforce. So today our discussions will focus on South Asia, and we'll bring in insights from multiple industries, from digital economy, manufacturing, logistics, maritime even. And these insights should hopefully help with more global relevance and insights beyond South Asia alone. So before I conclude, I want to invite on stage, I want to thank first all of the speakers that are here. One particular speaker I'm really excited about now is Professor Rohini Pande, as I bring her on stage to give our keynote address. She's the professor of economics and the director of the Economic Growth Center at Yale University. She's also the faculty director of inclusion economics at Yale. Formerly, she was the professor of international political economy at the Harvard Kennedy School. And Rohini's extensive research, which has really influenced policy in South Asia and globally, has been an inspiration to me, but so many others. Millions of women have been able to be impacted by some of the policy changes and or discussions that her work has directly brought together. She's a guru in this space for female labor force participation, and I say this for all the people here in the room today who've come here to see her. She's an incredible mentor and guide to lots of women, including myself, and I really, really hope that you get to learn more from her today. So Professor Pande, please welcome to the stage. Your floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohani. I can only disappoint after that, but thank you so much, and thank you for bringing together this group. Thanks to Kate and others as well for the space, and I think, Sohani, really more power to you. I think I've just been so impressed seeing everything you've been doing since I first heard about you from Erica when you were an undergraduate at Duke. So what I wanted to do today was really build on themes that Sohani had asked me to, but in some ways, hopefully broader and narrower sense. I want to more broadly lay out, I think, some of the issues we want to think about when we think about bridging this gap between what women want and what the economy is able to provide them. But it's going to be narrower in that I'm going to largely talk about the context of India, since that's really where most of my work is focused. But I also think that India is an interesting context to look at. It's a very fast-growing, lower middle-income economy. It has, on some aspects like education, done incredibly well at supporting women. But we don't see this translating yet into the labor market. And it's also worth remembering that one reason for thinking about countries like India, or more broadly lower-income countries, is that today, it's just demographics, but over 80% of the world's women live in these lower-income countries. Let's see. So as I mentioned, we've seen a dramatic reduction in education gaps for gender, and I think in many countries the concerns now are about the reverse gender gap, about the fact that boys are falling behind in education at many levels. Yet where we don't see this translate, at least in lower-income countries, is when it comes into job opportunities. And I think increasingly there's been a lot more interest, and that's what I'm going to talk about, in thinking not about an individual's specific issues, but what may be the systemic barriers at the level of the society or economy that are holding them back. Now, a first view you might take is maybe still the best thing to do is to focus on growth. That you just look across the world and you see richer countries, there are more women working often in wage labor than in poorer countries. And one example of where you can think of getting some inspiration of this is the US. So if you look at either the black or the blue line, they're just differences in how the data series is constructed before the census had the information. What you see is as the US got richer, so as its GDP increased over time, we see the gender gap in labor force participation reduced. And so I've superimposed on this graph in green, India. And so what you could conclude from this is, India doesn't look great right now, but that's just because it's poorer. And it's to the left of the point at which its GDP is high enough that women enter the labor force in large numbers. So a little bit inspired by this question, and I'll talk a bit about it, we have at the Economic Growth Center a group of economists thinking about gender growth gaps. And so we put together labor force surveys, both that had already been harmonized, some more that we harmonized, to really look at this question in the context of today's lower middle income countries. So this is around 150 countries for which we have multiple data points. So if you just look at some of the main countries, again, the same thing, just ask what does the gender gap in labor force look against GDP, you find a very mixed pattern. So if you look at, in this one, if you look at, for instance, Brazil or Mexico, that looks like good news. You start, each of those dots in the same color would be the same country in different years. You do start seeing a decline in the gender growth gap. But if you look at India, if you even look at China, you look at South Africa, and you look at Indonesia, you really see no clear pattern. And this holds up when you look at this in a regression framework. So as I said, you can look at it across countries. So you can just ask the question of, do richer countries have a lower gender gap in labor markets? And you see that. But then if you ask the question in changes, so you ask that as the GDP grows, so as there are changes in GDP, do you see changes in the gender gap? And there, if you look at it with all the caveats that you can have on data series and cross-country regressions, you don't see any relationship, and in fact, some evidence that it is reversed. So if you look at the top panel, that's a typical cross-country regression, and you see some evidence that the gender growth gap in labor force participation or in employment or paid work reduces as you're a richer country. But then once you start running the same in changes, the only thing that remains of similar sign is the fact that there is marketization of the economy. So women will start working more for pay as the country gets richer, but you no longer see any robust relationship between labor force participation and growth. So I think this is sort of a first motivation to say that maybe for some countries that we saw, like for Brazil and Mexico, growth has delivered returns for women, but there is no way we can take this for certain. And probably a lot of the reason that's going on is institutional or systemic barriers in these countries, which is what I turn to now. So let me start by giving you some examples of the two main sides that people have talked about. So this is a film called Mrs. in India that came out last year, which was an example of a woman who married into, a working woman who married into a very traditional household. Her problems and the fact that she just ended up leaving in the end rather than managing to change the system. So these are what we would think of, and I think a lot of discussion in the literature has been on such supply side and normative constraints. I think more recently there's also recognition that sometimes this affects demand side behavior. So for instance, Nina Buchman, who was a student here, thought about how this actually changes employers' willingness to hire women. And an example of this is, I think last year it made the news that the Apple supplier Foxconn was not hiring married women in India on the grounds that they would face significant normative constraints, or possibly because they were being paternalistic about it. So one could stop here and say that this is it. We can do the research, but in terms of the bridging that Suhani talked about, maybe that's hard. But I'd say this is actually, I think, right now an opportunity as well. Building on, I think, years of activism by many groups, we have begun to see significant policymaker interest in actually changing this. So, this is from a couple of years ago, and I think very much what Suhani was talking about in her report. There's a lot more interest, not just in thinking about flexible work or remote arrangements, but also recognition of, the so-called economic power that women have. And so what I want to do in the next 10 minutes is really give you some examples of, I think, where evidence can help sharpen what often is beginning to happen in policy, but perhaps is not happening in the most impactful or cost-effective way. And that I think is an important way in which we can build bridges right now, because there's certainly a lot of research going on in this area, and I think there's increasing policy interest both within countries and internationally. So let me start by kind of first talking about, I think, the different types of evidence that are possibly useful for policymakers. And I think this is certainly some place where researchers like I am often guilty, is that we focus a lot on really trying to understand causal effects. But when you talk to policymakers, often that what changes attitudes or what is willing to push the needle on policy is really much more basic data. So I alluded to this earlier, but just as a 30-second advertisement, for the last few years at Yale, we've been bringing together people from both the macro and micro side to really think about what are the different types of evidence that can be useful. But before turning to that, let me just mention again just the two puzzles that we're going to be thinking about all of this in the context of. So the first one is for South Asia. In a lot of countries now, a lot of the discussion has been about the child penalty. So the idea that women enter the labor market, but when they have a child, they see a significant decline in their earnings after that. In South Asia, and this is from India, but this is true across other South Asian countries as well, the striking feature is there's less of a child penalty. It's rather that women are not entering the labor market. So what you see here, this is from the labor force surveys against age, just what activities they're doing. So you can see for age 18, the blue bar is the highest for both men and women. So most people are unmarried and studying. But then what you see is that for men, the pink area, orange-pink area expands, which is to be working and married. While for women, what expands is the yellow bar, which is to be married, but neither studying nor working. And you can see this very clearly in the data that women are getting educated at similar rates, they're not working, and when people therefore run kind of simple decompositional regressions, they're left with the conclusion that the main return to education for women is in the marriage market. And so then there's a lot of discussion about maybe that's good, maybe that's what you need to have children who are going to invest in human capital, but you can see from the perspective of women, it's a bit of an unending cycle. I have my daughter, she earns a lot, she gets educated a lot to then educate her daughter. So I think somewhere we need to start thinking about how you actually think about the alternative, which is getting returns in the labor market. And that comes to this, is that when you look at labor force participation in both urban and rural, but I think strikingly in urban areas, this is the flip. So this is labor force non-participation. So what you see is, this is true the world over, men work, right? Roughly 80-90% of the men work once they reach working age. But for women, we see very little to no gradient with education. If anything, in urban areas, women who have upper secondary education are slightly less likely to work than those with less education. So as I said, sort of what we've been doing at the Growth Center, and this is broader than just thinking about India or South Asia, is really to ask this question of, what are the different things that can help inform. So the first is really just thinking about basic metrics or indices. So there's work that was done by faculty, including those at Stanford, on thinking about how do you measure the growth effect of these distortions? What are the wedges it creates in the labor market? So some of my colleagues have been trying to construct this more broadly across different countries to really provide some basis, some numbers to the question of if you got women into the labor force, how much would productivity increase by? I've been colleagues working on this on the macro side, on the micro side, and then also trying to take this to policy forums and work with them on how they would operationalize it. And really the idea is that I think as researchers, we've often focused a lot on just very specific what policies work. But I think if you want to move the needle in terms of activity, you really need to also start thinking about what is that index that a policymaker can kind of shame countries on, or things that we don't love doing often, but I think are important if you really want to try to effect change here. So just to give you one example of this, I showed you some suggestive evidence of why growth isn't enough. But you can also, as I said, look at this in terms of just an index, and this is something that there's been a lot of work that has happened in economics. But very often what I think happens is we have an incredibly seminal paper that gets published on it. I think that's used a bit, but then less is done to really bring it all the way to policy. So what my colleagues have been doing have been trying to take the methodology of Sheikley and Jones and actually try to ask how we can apply this across countries using labor force data. And the idea here is you're going to use observed differences in wages, labor supply, and sorting to ask what is the extent of misallocation you see. And I think this is distinct from some of the most used measures, at least at the World Bank right now, which come from looking at just legal barriers, either de jure or de facto, which are important. But this tries to tell you what's this effect on outcomes. So the first study they did was across Indian states, and I think that was actually featured in the World Development Report last year. And what they show is that if you just equalize the distortions across Indian states, and so you bring it down to the level of the lowest state, you will increase state-level productivity by up to 15%. And I think, I think this is hopefully the kind of number that one can use to try to create, say, some competition across Indian states to improve women in the labor market. So I'm sure I will soon run out of time, but let me just tell you what I'm hoping to do, and then we'll see how far I get. I want to talk a little bit about what we know on kind of constraints for women. But then I think when we think about policy, one insight you can get from academia is really what you want to think about is who are the gatekeepers and how do we actually affect their behavior. And that's some of the policy work I want to talk about. So in terms of what's happening, why do we see what's happening in women? So there was some earlier work by a couple of my colleagues, Michael Peters and Fabrizio, showing that India has had service-led growth. This service-led growth has been urban biased and has benefited those in urban areas more than rural areas. At the same time, what they noted in that but didn't pursue till now is that, that there is rapid urbanization. So in this paper, what they ask what are the gender differences in how urbanization, or rather how service-led growth affects men and women. And what they find is, urbanization is associated with women dropping out of the labor market, and so urban female labor force participation in India is significantly lower than rural. But then they also go beyond the fact of saying, oh, this is just an income effect, or people are richer and so women are not working, to show that it's at least in the data, it looks like it's a combination of norms and discrimination, so both supply side and demand side factors that matter. So when you have that, one thing you could think about, and I think Sohani alluded to, and I will come back to this, I think, during the day, is that maybe we need to meet women where they are. And if they're in the house, we need to meet them often through digital tools. And this has been a focus across several countries and in many states in India to try to just increase access to smartphones. So we've seen several governments, several state governments say, let's have schemes where we just provide smartphones to women. So we studied one of these schemes in the state of Chhattisgarh, which was an early mover in this. And through a set of surveys and often the timing of whether we surveyed someone before or after rollout was randomized, what we found is very similar to, I think, what we found in the first wave of literature on microfinance, which is assets move or money moves within the household. So you can give a smartphone to a woman, but there's no reason it'll stick with her. It'll probably move to her son, it'll probably move to someone else. And so what we see out here is the first graph shows you that in the very short run, like 3 to 6 months after smartphones are provided, you do see women state that they're more likely to have smartphones. And then in the longer run, this completely disappears. The phones are no longer there. However, if at the time of providing the smartphone, you actually combine it with a training or ways to make women both feel that they can use the phone and how they hold on to it, we find that in those cases, not only do they have phones, they use them more, and perhaps in contrast to what we've seen in richer countries, it actually is positive on mental health. So the way you should think about it is a lot of these women are very isolated. They have moved at the time of marriage from one village to another. They've typically had their first child, even if fertility has fallen, they'll have had their first child very soon after they've moved. They're at home with their husband's family that they don't know very well, and not much way to be in touch with, say, their natal household or others. And phones provide a link, not just for that, but phones also just provide entertainment. The number of women who'd say we just use it to watch things on YouTube is very high. And so I think there's a different way in which smartphones will work for this population, but it's not enough to just give phones. Otherwise, we're going to end up in the same place I think we ended up a lot with microfinance. These are just, I think another example is when it comes to phones, is really thinking about the use case. So very often, if you think about the use case that rural households are seeing, it's still seeing an urban woman on a large screen using the phone apparently to do things that families don't want. But the last one, I think, was an example of why the training helped, right? So it's like, I don't know how to save contacts. I'll just give it to my son who knows how to do it. But if you train them enough to start getting used to it, I think that is valuable. The other thing we found in the short run, I think this was kind of a bit depressing, but a reminder for why you need this work, is we randomized whether we surveyed people before the woman got a phone or after. And what we found was that that soon after getting the phone, norms around phone use actually became more conservative. Men started stating much more that they had more needs for the phone, which is consistent with now there being a valuable asset that you can get hold of if you actually argue it's meant for men. So I think, I'm going to be a bit fast now, so I want to talk a couple of other things, but I think, this just gives you an example of, I think, thinking about where the constraints are important in designing policies. So to not just think about, I need to give phones, but really asking what are the barriers, and these are all examples of papers that try to do that. So let me spend the last couple of minutes I have is to really talk about something that I know Lisa is going to pick up, among others, is really unintended consequences of policy interventions. I'm going to leave this as a teaser for Lisa's talk, which is the idea that sometimes well-intended policies, like, for instance, maternity leave policies in India, could have negative impacts, which I'll leave for Lisa to tell us about. What I want to talk about for a second is, this fact that what we've seen over the last couple of years is an incredible expansion of unconditional cash transfers to women across Indian states. So you can see this, and I suspect the remaining states will get it as soon as their elections come around, is this aim of targeting unconditional transfers to women, and very explicitly saying this is, some states very explicitly say this is because we don't see women working, we need to provide them support. And you can see there are two views, right? So there's one view to say that it gives women agency within the household. They're going to be able to negotiate for things, including whether they're able to leave the household. But it's unclear, because if there's another view to say that now you have some money by virtue of, you're richer, stay at home, look after children, can also strengthen normative constraints. And I think this is the kind of place where we really need research to start thinking about what is the net impact on women's work when we give out these kind of unconditional cash transfers. So I'm going to talk about very briefly one study that we did. I'm out of town, so I'll just say what we find is was actually not providing unconditional cash transfers, but strengthening women's ability to access pay that they should be getting under NREGA, which was going to joint household accounts, but now we ensure that it went to their own accounts. And when we did that, we found not only did their work go up, but importantly, we also found that their norms liberalized for women. And so they became more positive about working. We don't, however, see that men's norms liberalized, so I think that's something we need to change on. Similarly, just let me end with one more example. There's been a lot of interest in entrepreneurship. So there's this Lakhpati Didi scheme that is going on through self-help groups. But again, the question is, how do you target this? How do you target this effectively? Do you just give it out to every self-help group member? Or should you give it more to some than others? Yeah. And here, I think, again, there's findings that suggest that, one way of doing it is that at least some of it should be targeted towards women who have started to expand their businesses. So this is a very nice study by Gaurav Chiplangar and Penny Goldberg that show across the world, so each of this is Africa, East Asia, and so on, is they look at the ratio between male and female employees, and they find that basically, if you are owned by a woman, you're just much more likely to have female managers. A bit more likely to have female workers, a lot more likely to have female managers. So if women hire women, and that is productive, they show their productivity gains, then with these kind of schemes, at least some of it should perhaps be a bit more targeted. So let me just end with just saying that I think, very much building what Rohini was saying, I think we want to start thinking a lot more about how we integrate these into policies and corporate strategies. And I think for us as researchers, what's very valuable to hear what policies and corporations are trying to do. We don't hear enough about that. I think forums like these are others are important so that, out of the 1,000 questions we can answer, we answer the ones that speak to what's actually happening on the ground. And so let me just end with, I think, some of these questions that will probably come up during the day, but are I think, questions that I think different parts of both the policy community, research community, and the private sector are thinking about, but perhaps more connections there would be useful. So thank you very much.
One of your graphs in the earlier stage where you were basically showing different countries and how the gender gap and the GDP were interrelated. Among the lower income countries, India was still showing pretty high on the gender gap, and this is like Mexico, South Africa. And so does that tend to communicate that it is not actually about the money, but more about the behaviorals and normative patterns and societal patterns, which are actually a differentiator?
Yeah, what it certainly tells us is that it's not as if as countries get richer, opportunities for women will rise and women will take them up. Now, where exactly those institutional barriers come in, whether they come in on the supply side or on the demand side, and how they differently show up across countries, I think is exactly where we need to go. But I think what I wanted to do is kind of move us away from this view that we don't need to do anything other than just focus on growth. And I think there's often, especially right now, when there are downturns or there are concerns, there's often you hear this claim that then not enough jobs anyway. So what we need to do is first just expand growth and expand jobs, and then women will get them as well. I think we have no evidence to see that's the pattern in the data.
Thanks. Yeah, and richer households actually are shown in India also to not have working women, which goes, thanks.
My name is Shreya, and I'm a graduate student at the law school. This is such interesting work. Thank you so much for sharing it. I was thinking how much of it is because of this psyche of a woman, not just in the lower sections of the society, but also like middle class and upper middle class women in India. I think there's some sort of, if I may say, complacency that develops over not working for a few years, and then they decide that, okay, maybe we don't want to work now that we're in a comfortable environment. I'm playing the devil's advocate, I get it. But I'm just trying to understand how much of work also needs to come from women in order to get into the workforce.
So I think, what you're saying, economists will call the income effect, that, basically as a household I get richer and maybe I opt out because now leisure is more valuable, or I have more advantage of doing housework compared to my partner, and so I'm the one who stays home. I think that's certainly a possibility. It's not what we see often in surveys. So what you see in surveys very often, I think both among younger and older populations, a desire to work. And I think, interestingly, a lot of what you also see in surveys is statements of boredom. So I think, I think it's a perfectly, I think what you're asking is a very reasonable explanation, and one that economists would agree with, but it may be going on for some, but we also see a lot of women who want to work but aren't able to get work.
Now, we will hear from Mr. Rajiv Jalota, who is with the Indian Administrative Services in the Government of India and the former chairman of the Bombay Port Trust. Mr. Jalota will bring in the government perspective and talk about how the government can be an enabler in bringing women into the workforce, even in traditionally male-dominated industries.
I have been given 5 minutes, so I'll be short. I'm truly honored to be speaking here about the role of government in enabling women's labor force participation. And I'll also draw upon my own experiences in public service to highlight how policy, partnerships, and people-first governance can drive transformative outcomes. I have the privilege of having served across departments, from skilling and employment to managing city municipal corporation, industrial corporations, providing lands to industries, to maritime industry. Across my roles, I have learned two key trends that are going to enable women to enter the workforce in a country like India. First, India has a huge growth potential. Manufacturing as well as services, both are growing. And I think next 15 years are going to be India's years. And second, the type of roles and jobs are shifting across sectors. And when there is an imperative for growth, women have to be a part of the workforce. There is no other way. Now, to harness these opportunities, government can serve three roles: that of a regulator, a promoter, and as a partner. And all these three roles will have to be complementary. First, as a regulator, India has more than 20 different acts. For instance, the Factories Act, the Maternity Benefit Act, which I think will be talked about quite frequently today, the POSH Act, Equal Remuneration Act, and Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, which form the backbone of ensuring a rights-based framework for working women. Secondly, it serves as a promoter through platforms like eShram portal, with over 300 million unorganized workers registered and 12 welfare schemes linked, and the National Career Service. The Modi government actively promotes women's workforce integration. In fact, in this eShram portal, more than 54% are women. Notably, India leads developing nations in gender-sensitive trade facilitation as well. Government has started schemes like working women's hostels and child care provisions across the country. It's a very, very big step, a very ambitious step as well, where a lot of work needs to be done by various players. This will have its ripple effect in years to come. In Maharashtra, for example, government launched a scheme that offered engineering contracts to unemployed youth, a model that can be scaled for female graduates across sectors. Now we talk about my personal experiences to highlight how government can act as an effective partner. While I was working in the Industrial Development Corporation in Maharashtra, being the most industrialized state, we were facing a huge investor demand. I introduced the policy of land acquisition by consent and making the landowners partners in development. While doing this, we also introduced skill training of the local population based on a skill demand assessment of future industries. This really helped both men and women among the population to start from ground zero in helping the industries set up while growing themselves economically. Women became part of construction, they worked as drivers, they were running canteens in industries. We also introduced financial literacy because the landowners can manage the huge sums of money they were getting from the industrial corporation as land compensation. Women were made part of all these future investments, and it had very brilliant effects. While working in the Mumbai Municipal Corporation, we trained women plumbers who were able to work in slums. More than 55% of Mumbai is in slums. There was a constant need of water pipeline repair, and who better than women can do it because they are the most stressed for water. We also ran a people-led sanitation program placing women at the core of toilet design, construction, and further operations and management of those toilets. While working as Commissioner Employment, we launched the modular employability schemes with industry-aligned training. And this increased the number of modular courses from 450 to 1500 in a matter of a year. Initiatives like Rojgar Katta matched local employers with women job seekers, a precursor to today's gig platforms. Government's attempts at gender mainstreaming, moving away from gender neutral or gender blind, can have profound impacts I'll give you an example of a mining sector in India recently where government started women in mining, and such a sector which is considered as the fort of males, we see that women are holding diverse roles as mine managers, mining engineers, geologists, maintenance engineers, and even heavy earth-moving machinery operators. This has seen good success. The present central government has also created still sector councils where gender mainstreaming is a focused area. For instance, in the logistics sector, we see that only 2% women are employed out of 9.5 million in freight logistics. By 2030, this sector is going to add 5.3 million new jobs, a crucial opportunity to increase women's participation through formal training, targeted policies, and more digitization coming in. In the tourism and cruise sector, India is a rising power in cruise employment, with more than 25% of global cruise crew being Indian, and the number of women is growing. Tourism provides vast employment potential to women. Digital work and automation, we are seeing a rise in digital infrastructure and remote work models. Women can increasingly access work from home, and we are seeing that non-traditional employment is coming up in a big way. As we move ahead in South Asia and those parts of the world where jobs will get created in large numbers for reasons known to all, empowering women in the workforce will not just be a policy goal, but also reinforces the country's economic foundation, enabling it to thrive in a competitive global landscape. Thank you, and I sincerely hope that women-focused narrative shaping the future workforce deployment is more than an economic shift. It's the dawn of a new era of empowerment and opportunity for all. Thank you.
So now to just give everyone a little context, the day is split up into 4 different parts, and each part will start with a research talk to ground us in data, followed by a panel discussion, and then the last part would be the lightning showcase that will focus on different organizations that are implementing on-ground solutions around increasing women's agency. So to dive into the first part of the day, we will focus on the supply-side constraints around bringing women into the workforce. So I would like to welcome Professor Soledad Prillman, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Stanford, to present her research on what really holds young Indian women back from joining the workforce and drawing on rich insights from vocational training programs across India.
Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to present a body of work thinking about adolescent women in India, and this is joint work with Charity Troyer Moore, but we are also going to see that a lot of the themes that came up in Rohini's talk are going to appear here, and that's in large part due to her advising and mentorship in many of these projects. And so I want to start by really drawing focus to adolescents, particularly those between the ages of 15 and 24. And what we know is that 1/5 of the population in South Asia is within this age group, and that this comprises about 1/4 of the world's youth. And yet, despite being such a large demographic, what we see is that this group accounts for about half of the unemployed across India. And in particular, we see this group is 6 times more likely to be jobless than older workers. And this, of course, is a gendered issue. Women's labor force participation, as we've already seen, is much lower than men's. This holds true in this group. But we also see that women are much more likely to have unemployment. And related to what Rohini talked about earlier about the share of women who remain at home without work, without education, what we see is that this really critically transforms right around the early 20s, where women leave school, get married, and end up in the home without entering the labor force. And so I've spent the last decade thinking about the role of vocational training, which is often targeting exactly this group, and in particular thinking about the role of Skill India, which is an initiative launched around 2015, meant to capitalize on this demographic dividend, these huge inflows of workers in this age group, and train youth for industrial growth across India. And by some estimates, about 2/3 of India's workforce is expected to need new skills or to be upskilled to achieve some of these growth plans. And so Skill India is an initiative that brings together skilling vocational training programs across 22 different ministries in the government and 36 schemes. And in particular, we've been working with one of the largest of these programs called DDU-GKY, which is based at the Ministry of Rural Development. And this program in particular targets rural youth between the ages of 15 and 35 living below the poverty line and provides them with skills training. But importantly, it's not just a skills training program, it's a program that really tries to match these unemployed or underemployed youth to jobs. And it does so by mandating that 75% of trainees get matched to work for any of the training agencies to get funded, and that those jobs must be contract labor at minimum wage or above, which often means that the jobs that they're getting placed in are in urban centers. So it's really solving this problem of bringing the rural workforce into urban areas. And the program also includes quotas for women with an expectation that at least 1/3 of trainees be women. So I'm going to present you a lot of different data sources that I'm happy to talk about at any point in time, but to try and think about whether Skill India is helping improve women's labor entry and what some of the remaining constraints are. So the first thing I want to highlight is that we see gender gaps in training take-up. Across the country, using administrative data from the program, less than 1/3, less than 30% of trainees are women, so meaning the quotas themselves aren't met. But we then mapped through both surveys and administrative data the pipeline, the pathway that young men and women take in the program. And what this figure shows you is this leaky pipeline. So the light green is the share of men on the left and women on the right who end up placed in jobs. So we see only 40% of women who enter the program end up taking up a job as compared to 60% of men. And this pipeline is leaky at different parts. The sort of darkest shade of this is the share of men and women who don't receive offers. So we see about 1/3 of women don't receive an offer. 32% of them who receive offers don't then accept those offers, and then this translates into placement outcomes. And these gender gaps persist even once jobs have been entered. So when we did this survey, within 9 months, we found that 74% of the young women who had taken up jobs, most of which had mandated or required urban migration, with 74% had left those jobs after 9 months, and of those, only about 12% were employed elsewhere. So we see this recalibration back to the statistics we've seen before. So what were the reasons for both rejecting job offers as well as leaving jobs? I'm presenting some survey data on job rejection, but you see the same answers mirrored in why women leave jobs. So on the left, what you see is that the number one reason that women say they didn't accept a job or that they left their job was because of their family. Family concerns, personal constraints. Often this was revolved around the marriage decision. The second biggest concern was around migration and the challenges that come with urban migration and with the safety that is associated. When we contrast this to young men on the right, what we see is a very different set of factors that shape their labor market decisions. Men are largely unhappy with the pay that they would be getting or the workplace conditions. So what is the family's role in all of this? We've talked a lot about norms. It's something that is a big part of the conversation on women's work. And so we did a survey with both young youth, adolescent girls and boys, as well as both of their parents. And so here what I'm showing you are attitudes around women's work for fathers and mothers. And if you just focus on the right, that shows you the share of mothers in blue and fathers in green that think that women should work. And so in some ways you see evidence of what Rohini's answer to the question was. Women vastly believe that women should be working. More than 80% of women state that women should be working, but we see this very large gender gap where fathers who serve as key gatekeepers to a much lower extent say that women should work. Interestingly, when you superimpose data from youth, so here I have young men in purple and young women in red, that gender gap doesn't just persist, it in fact widens, with young men showing even more or even less support for women's work than their fathers do, which suggests that generationally this pattern of attitudes is not changing, but also really highlights some of the marriage market concerns that might exist around women's work. I additionally wanted to highlight then when you asked fathers and mothers about their support for women's migration, what we see, women's and men's migration, what we see is that there's a lot of support on the left for allowing both young men in green, young women in blue to move to state capitals. But when you really think about movement to these larger cities like Delhi or places outside of the state in which they live, drop for women's migration is substantial. And that's where this gender gap really emerges. And thinking about this placement between rural and urban jobs is a constraint. And so I'm going to talk about one program that we tried to evaluate whether it would solve this constraint, and in particular, whether it would help increase women's entry into vocational training programs. And so DDU-GKY, this vocational training program that we studied, typically recruits both young women and young men through private training agencies, typically contract workers from outside of the community who by and large are men. And so we worked with a government innovation that thought about what happens if you localize recruitment, if you put the identification of potentially interested youth into the hands of local recruiters, largely women. And the idea was that local recruiters would have both better information about who would actually be interested in moving, as well as could serve as role models to persuade families and the youth themselves. And so the program that we studied was an innovation in ERISA that employed women's self-help group members, so members of local women's groups, to recruit youth. It trained them on the program, it trained them on job outcomes, and then it paid them to recruit youth, and they received more money the longer the youth stayed in the program. And we're going to leverage the fact that the entire state was not eligible for this program because they didn't have these women's groups on the ground. Women's groups were created in only some blocks. And so I'm going to show you evidence both from a difference in differences strategy to get the overall policy effect, as well as an RCT that tries to isolate the effect of just the local recruiters. Because I should have mentioned that in addition to these local recruiters, the program brought in block governments, block bureaucracies, to provide recruitment fairs and other support. So what we see is this is just general overall effects of the program for young women. And what we see is this program did substantially increase young women's take-up of DDU-GKY as well as their placement in jobs. In fact, it about doubled it. And we see that it had very little effect for young men. So this program really was changing young women's engagement. But when we look at the RCT, where we were really trying to isolate, is it these local women recruiters that are having change? What we find is that that was not what was going on. These local recruiters who we randomized, there was no effect on their presence on women's enrollment. And when we spent some time talking to them, what seemed to emerge is that they really struggled to convince families that this would be acceptable. They didn't have normative authority to change the behavior of families. So what then drove this overall positive effect? We think and have some suggestive evidence that the recruitment fairs were a really important part of this. They provided and centralized information so that young women had more job opportunities available to them, and that gave women more choice over both trade, job location, and employer. And what we observe is that they're more likely to select into sex-segregated workplaces. So essentially, it allowed them to find work that fit norms. And so just to quickly conclude, what we see, like many others have shown, is that norms shape parental support for young women's work. Skill India helps to address many of the structural constraints that we might imagine, skilling gaps, rural-urban labor market information gaps, migration support, but families still play an important role in limiting training and job entry. And what we find is that local women recruiters don't serve as role models and aren't able to address women's concern, though this may simply be because they didn't hold normative authority in these communities, but that providing more job options may allow women to opt into more norm-abiding jobs. So thank you so much.
Up next, we have our first panel discussion for the day. The panel explores a question that we don't talk about enough. What role do men play in making gender equity possible? From family support to workplace inclusions, the conversation starts here. Moderating this panel, we have Dr. Shraddha Kale Kapale, Associate Director of Myna Foundation, Mrs. Smriti Rani, Cabinet Minister, Government of India between 2014 to 2024, and Chairperson, Alliance for Global Good. Alessandra Myna, Professor of Economics at Stanford University and Senior Fellow at the CEPR Center. Zubeda Bai, CEO of Grameen Foundation, and Anshul Tiwari, founder and CEO of Youth Ki Awaaz and Center for Public Insights. Please welcome all our esteemed panelists.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Shraddha, and I'm here to present the panel discussion on championing women's agency, health, and family support, role of men in caregiving. So when I truly think about what actually supports women's economic empowerment, I think more than offering job opportunities or policies, it's more about what happens behind the doors, like, in the everyday dynamics of our homes. So with one such powerful example, through our work at Mahila, what we do, we work with low socioeconomic strata of women there. And it's so to give you all a context, we work in an area where hygiene is really poor. And what do you call, I'm sorry, I'm just too nervous to talk. There's such big panelists here and Smriti ma'am here. I guess. So I'm just...
Breathe. That's why I made sure I sit 3 seats away.
So I think I have everything in my hand, and yeah, okay. So opportunities of paid work, it often happens behind the closed doors and everyday dynamics of our homes. So most powerful examples come from my own experience in Mahila, where we work with urban slum community women. And the hygiene here is extremely poor. There is shame and stigma around the topic. And it is really difficult for a woman to speak up about her own issues and speak up in their own household settings, right? So there were many women who would come up to us and tell us that please do talk to our husbands because they just don't get it, that we need support. And while we realized that we are supposed to work with the husbands and have interventions around it, and we also had initiatives and programs around it, but we also realized that it's more important to work with the women and help them to help themselves to speak up more confidently in their household settings. So while we're working this, and we had programs around how to speak more effectively, clearly, and also being polite. So while women learn all of this, they gradually started taking small steps, and we saw this impact on the households where women used to not tell the husband directly, oh, come over and cook the whole meal for us. They would take small gradual steps like, oh, could you help me wash the dishes today, or wash the rice today? And it's because it's more of a partnership and not make the men look inferior, because the power dynamics are also very strong. So one fine day, one Sunday, the Myna trainer happens to go for a follow-up session in the community, and one husband just turns up and he's very proudly telling the Myna trainer that, ma'am, I now do the dishes for my wife in those days of the month, referring to the periods, very proudly. And then Myna trainer, of course, appreciated him, and then he left. And when the follow-up session started, the wife says, if that's what I get during the periods, I would love to have it every day. So yeah, but that brought a deeper conversation of how effective and clear yet polite communication helps, bringing in men, role of men in the household responsibilities and caregiving. So we realized that very soon, and we are, having programs around it. So when men enter, it just doesn't give time to women, but it it just doesn't reduce the physical strain, but it gives time to her to have more opportunities, grab more opportunities, learn more skills, even if she wants to rest. I think it just buys her time. So it's not just about reducing the physical strain, but it's also about empowering her, not just economically, but also taking care of her own health. So yeah, Drawing from this, Professor Myna, I have my next question for you. So based on your research, what does the current data tells us about the links between the role of men in increasing women's agency? Where do we see the strongest correlations and where are the gaps?
I'll just begin thanking the organizers for this amazing lineup, and I'm really honored and excited to contribute to this debate. But I'll jump right into this fascinating and important topic, which touches upon the fact that decisions about work are done by families, and families are many components, and these components have different opinions, are subject potentially to different norms, different incentives, different preferences. And so thinking about decisions around work, both whether, say, a woman should work in the market for pay and how much she should work, requires necessarily thinking about the organic decision-making that happens at the level of the household. And research has emphasized, I would say, two important areas of gap that are relevant for different populations. One that has been discussed already to a wide extent this morning, which is the notion that in many countries, this is definitely, we know from the data the case in South Asia, female labor force participation tends to be relatively low and potentially a source of slowed growth, limited agency for women, more limited economic and financial independence. And the other one is that even when women work, and this is true everywhere, they still often do not achieve the same levels in senior leadership positions as men tend to do. And, recently, even in the US, we celebrate the fact that 10% of CEOs are female, right?
Yeah.
And so with this background, the use of time and the division of labor within the household has been highlighted for both of these domains to be extremely important in influencing what type of labor market participation and employment hours margin women make. I was just looking at some numbers, for example, from India, from the Indian Time Use Survey, where women tend to spend 10 times more of a percent of their time on home production responsibilities than men do. But if you looked around the world, this pattern will arise over and over again. Women are obviously much more involved in the care. If you look now at research that has tried to understand why this is happening and what can be done to more equally distribute the care within the household, a theme that we've discussed a lot this morning emerges over and over again. And this has to do with traditional gender roles and the important role the norms play in characterizing how we act. And so since you've been asking about what research tells us about what's promising in leading to a more equitable division of this labor that then can open up time, both in terms of pure hours, but also mental time. We talk a lot about the mental load and so on. I don't have extremely positive answers, but I have something hopefully reasonably optimistic, which is obviously changing norms is extremely, or influencing norms is extremely challenging. What appears to be somewhat more promising are interventions that target the youth. So I'm thinking about the work, for example, of Professor Seema Jayachandran and her co-authors targeting adolescents in India with school-based interventions. But also, say, emerging work from Europe on paternity leave. So paternity leave doesn't necessarily change so much the way in which couples, at least this is emerging research from Spain, suggests what couples are doing, but it really changes what the children are seeing their parents do, and it's affecting them possibly long-term, how they see the role of men and women. So it's a more difficult battle to fight in the short run. It's more of a long-term investment that needs to be made by all the actors that we've discussed this morning. Finally, I'll just discuss briefly something that touches upon also what Professor Pande and Prillman were discussing this morning, which is the notion of perceptions of norms. I've been involved in data collection in 60 countries, soliciting opinions and also perceptions of both whether women should be free to work outside the home, among opinions of both men and women in a representative sample, and also whether government and firms should be giving priority to women when hiring for leadership positions. And what emerges, particularly very strikingly for India, I would say, but we see that very clearly there, but in many countries of our sample, is that there is a very strong tendency to overestimate the degree of conservativeness on these matters. That, for instance, in our sample, more than 80% of our respondents supported the notion that women should be free to work outside the home. Yet they only believe that around 60% of others in their country agree with that statement. And in particular, it is men's views that are the most stereotyped. So men tend to be more conservative than women, but we tend to think that they're much more conservative than they truly are. And so potentially interventions that can promote dialogue around these matters that can be done at many levels can help bring men more into this conversation.
Also, I feel environment around the woman also plays a lot of role, like which environment she's been brought up in. Like if she sees other women around her doing the same kind of thing, and then rather having a role model which inspires her more to take it up. Yeah. How do you see men's involvement or lack of it in caregiving, household decision making affect the women's health outcomes and workforce participation?
So I would say research is emerging about the importance of, in particularly I would say for the second aspect, which is helping women achieve more equitable careers more similar to the ones of men, but also to some extent also the mere entry into paid work. That care responsibilities are really an important factor of limitation. And in terms of the implication of that for health, for example, we start seeing some evidence that, going back to the paternity leave discussion, I know today we'll talk a lot about maternity leave, but obviously paternity leave is also quite important to level the playing field potentially, but appears, well, it seems to have more limited effects on work. And this is again research coming from Europe, so obviously with all the necessary caveats, it does appear to bolster and support women's health in a very critical time. So I think we're starting to see some empirical evidence suggesting that when women can access a more equitable distribution of family responsibilities, their health benefits as well as their employment opportunities.
Yeah. And what additional data or research would help us make an even stronger case for policies or programs that address the role of men in increasing women's agency?
As I've mentioned, we start seeing more research that helps us understand what the role of norms is in shaping female employment and agency. I think more could be done in terms of exploring what promising channels can be leveraged so that we don't have to hope that in 30, 40 years, when the children of today have grown up, we can see change, but we can see more immediate change. And so one notion that I think, for example, is quite fascinating is almost 70% of Indian respondents in a recent survey argue that children might suffer if their mother work. That's from the World Value Survey. We see that again in many contexts. We know much less about what people think, whether people think that children might suffer if their father works or if their father doesn't work. I think thinking more about the role of fathers in child development and highlighting how important it has been, and it is, might be a promising avenue as well.
Yeah, that's great. So with that, I'd love to turn to the only male panelist here today. So Anshul, you work extensively with India's youth. What emerging attitudes or behaviors do you see among young men regarding women's agency and shared caregiving responsibilities?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that question, Shraddha, and congratulations, Sohani and team, on this amazing conference. Very happy to be the token male on the panel. Definitely need more of that. I think, so just for context, I run Youth Ki Awaaz, which is a citizen media platform. We have about 200,000 people every month who are writing and sharing stories, their lived experiences across multiple issues. Women in the workplace is one such issue. And as a part of the center that we run, we do a lot of rapid surveys to understand on a day-to-day basis what people are thinking, particularly about women's participation in the workforce. I think there are a couple of things that we've sort of noticed, which others have, of course, talked about, quite a bit already. But just to reiterate on some fronts, one thing that we've noticed about young men's attitude towards, women in the workplace is that young men are actually very conflicted, and I think it's very important to highlight that. And they are conflicted not just because of the fact that there is, of course, patriarchal norms around them, around their upbringing, etc. But they're also conflicted because they're seeing these conversations happen, but they're also wondering how is it that they can actually participate or they can help when they're actually growing up in a culture that discourages it, through and through. What we've seen in a lot of our data is that in a very recent survey that we had conducted was that 37% of the men who participated in our survey, they said that they've participated in household responsibilities, in sharing household responsibilities. But when we went deeper into what that really meant, it sort of showed what one of the examples that Shraddha that you gave was that it's a couple of days in a month, or 2 days or 3 days in a month, which makes it seem like I'm doing my share and that's enough. That's enough participation from my side. The second thing that we've seen is that there is a very severe lack of relatable role models. So what I mean by that is that you'll find a lot of men who are, say, extremely popular celebrities who are really, talking about the fact that we need more women in the workplace, we need men participating a lot more in the household, but they're not as relatable. They are not talking in the language, in the literally the literal regional language, for example, in many cases, that we need to have these conversations in. They are not culturally contextual for a lot of men, who are actually able to have some of these conversations as well. And the other very important aspect that men themselves highlight is the cultural permission, so to say, that is given to them to participate, a lot more actively in household responsibilities or in a lot of the kind of, pressures that men themselves face. There is a lot more conversation around men needing to be the, financially successful out of the say, in a relationship, for example. And that has a very direct influence on how men are looking at the workplace in general as well. What we've also noticed is that, of course, there are a lot more women who are very proactively having a conversation about this. But social media, for example, is playing a very big role in creating communities of men that agree with each other very quickly on aspects of the fact that, we need to be more financially successful, we need to have a certain kind of a job, women don't necessarily need that, and so on. And social media is not built for a very equal conversation. The algorithms are not built to encourage you to have sort of a much more diverse perspective than you currently do. So I think there is a lot of that we're noticing as well. Generally, what we've seen through a lot of our data is that agency for women is also being shaped by social permissions that women are being afforded, in families and so on and so forth. And what often happens is that the treatment that you're getting in your house because of your household responsibilities and the treatment that you're getting at work, because of your workplace responsibilities, the understanding between these two, segments of your life does not really exist. So your workplace colleagues, your bosses may not necessarily understand what challenges you're facing at home and vice versa. And that is also leading to a lot of dissonance in terms of, not just the initiation of participation, but the longevity of a woman in the workplace, as well. So yeah, broadly, that's sort of what we've seen through our data in India as well.
So Anshul, Youth Ki Awaaz has gathered over 1 million data points on young people's aspiration and challenges. How can researchers, policymakers, and employers use these insights to better tailor interventions or job opportunities for women?
I think first thing is a lot of these data points indicate towards cultural norms, something that we've all spoken about. I think everybody has spoken about, as well. I think there is something to be said about understanding lived experiences of young men and women both. So of course, going beyond pure data points and trying to see what what cultural context exists where, in a country like India, but not just in India. I think it's a global phenomenon, especially in the global south. I think we do need to pay a lot more attention to these lived experiences. That's the first thing. And I think that's what we probably need to create more urgent behavior change campaigns or whatever there might be. The second thing that we've noticed is that a lot of this data can help us create very phase-specific interventions. So what I mean by that is that, in one of the surveys that we had conducted with young women, 72% of the women who are already in the workforce, they mentioned about the biggest barriers in the workforce for them being at the promotion stage. Where they're noticing that they are not getting promoted versus a male colleague and so on and so forth, even though they've put in the same effort, they've had the same outcomes. Where I feel like, what that tells us is that there is a specific moment in a working woman's journey where an intervention potentially needs to be created as well. The third thing that we've noticed is that is around pay. So pay, we've noticed it's not just the only problem. Agency around how you're spending the money, how much you're getting to access is also a big issue. So I feel like pay equity, role clarity, those are areas of intervention, where interventions can be created. And of course, the last sort of aspect that we've noticed is that we need to create, this is a conversation to be had a lot more with men. And the way to be having this conversation is to not sort of go to men and say that, hey, you need to start thinking differently, because that's not going to happen. In fact, what we've seen over and over again, we've done a mapping of podcasts, video series, films where there has been a direct conversation with men. Somebody has tried to tell men, you should not do this or you should not behave like this. The biggest consumer of such content is actually women. It's not men. So I feel, and this is across the board. So I think we need to, find a way to have these conversations with men, probably in a way that men will feel like, okay, I'm a part of this conversation, I'm in the room, I'm willing to understand and so on, which is I don't have a solution for how to do it. It's been a challenge for us consistently, but yeah, I think that's probably where one can get started.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what I've also seen is women sometimes are the barrier for themselves when they learn to effectively communicate. And of course, like, men are not like stone-hearted or anything, right? They also have a heart, but it's just that it's two different gender roles altogether. Sometimes it's more like, inko samajhta hi nahi. They don't understand. Why don't they understand? That's what I've seen, especially from the context where I come from. So why they just don't understand? And sometimes we just have to give it back to the women that, maybe you need to communicate more effectively for them to understand.
I just want to say one point, which is that so in our work, what we've realized is that the onus of this conversation should actually not be on women. Yes. I think men need to talk to men. And I think that's a very important, because otherwise, regardless
but then we need to have more role models around it to start this conversation.
For sure. Yeah.
True. Okay.
I'm waiting my turn peacefully.
It was really exciting to see your response there to some of the points.
Yeah, I know. It's physically and facially very difficult to restrain myself. But you have to give the due respect to the token man on the panel. And also defer to his young age, presuming he's young. I'm 49. How old are you?
34.
34, not that far off. So I'll wait for my turn.
Okay. So yeah.
Is it my turn? Okay.
Yeah. So now that brings to policies and
So let me first level up in this room. I'm not here only because, of course, Suhani knew my role as a policy maker and met me at the World Economic Forum, and that's why this lovely lady here is continuously goading me to speak, because I serve as the B20 co-chair in South Africa for digital transformation. There are 3-4 presumptions and biases, and pardon me for saying this, that you're doing this entire conversation on. One, that the only people who affect a woman, her agency, are men in the family. The family unit is not only limited to men. The second presumption that you're suffering from is that only young men are the harbingers of change. Now, this is what I call inertia of old narratives. The third presumption and bias that possibly this conversation suffers from is that this is a global south or predominantly Indian problem. It is not. The fourth bias that you suffer from is that there has to be the existence of role models to bring forth change. Anybody who waits for a role model cannot be the harbinger of change, because not only is change a constant of life, but if change always waited for role models, you would not have a Mahatma to talk about. So now ask me the question. Oh yes, another context to me. Apart from being a policymaker, I'm 49 today. At the age of 17, I used to sell cosmetics for $2 a day on the roads of Delhi. I'm the first girl in my family to work. I'm the first girl in my family to own my own capital assets. So I come from being dirt poor to, yes, now being listed as somebody who's worthy to sit on this panel. So what I will speak will be from experiences which are not colored due to distinction in office, which is not colored because now I have money, because there was a time when I had none. Yes.
Yeah. So ma'am, to make this shift be widespread, what specific policy gaps or untapped strategies do you believe would be most effectively accelerate progress on role of men in championing women's health?
Firstly, we need to recognize again that the dichotomy we live in is that it is not only men who stifle growth. Let me reiterate why I say this and let me evidence it. Instead of creating more fissures, let's have conversations that can bridge the gap. It is not a young man who helped bring to fruition a legislation which gave women the right to medically terminate a pregnancy at 24 weeks in India, a legislation that was waiting in the wings since the 1960s. It was a 74-year-old man who brought that legislation. It was not a young man who stood at the ramparts of the Red Fort to say women should have access to a sanitary pad at 1 rupee. It was a 74-year-old man. It was not a young man or a woman in high office who ensured 33% reservation for women in Indian Parliament. It was a 74-year-old man. So the bias or the presumption that change can only happen by men who are young is something that I don't suffer from because I've seen evidence. Today in India, we have close to 400 million women who are of the working age, 323 million women who work in the informal sector. But how do you look at the informal sector? The differentiations between the informal and the formal sectors are from the presumption that women who are in the informal sector will not have medical benefits and cover, will not have insurance, or will not have pensions. That is a presumption, and I'll defer to the professor of economics to my right for all that needs to be fact-checked. Now, in India today, we have 130 million women who are informal in their vocation, however, are part of the insurance and pension schemes. Today, we have close to 48% of women under the 100 million program, family program of Ayushman Bharat, which gives you access to 32,000 hospitals across India. 48% of all hospital admissions, and the number is 36 million women have received hospital admissions for across 1,300 diseases, including surgeries, under that program that is evidenced, woman by woman, experience by experience. 240 million women have gotten themselves screened for the cancer of the breast and the cervix, which means all these women who wanted to leverage their agencies with regards to health were waiting for an instrument which is funded, which is provided for by government, so that irrespective of the men in their family, they could have and create access. So while we're talking about championing the women's agency, we also need to factor in what happens when, irrespective of the role of men within a family unit, that if you have the access, if you have the opportunity to gain some support in the healthcare sector, how does that impact your life? There are many who presume that in India, when you talk about the LFR, the labor force participation, one needs to also reflect on who are the women who are not counted. So let me give you a small example. 90 million women in India work in self-help groups. Their average business every year is close to $37 billion. They have received from the Indian Treasury in the last decade 8 lakh crore rupees. And the fascinating part is that their NPA on the credit that they have taken is less than 2%. It is evidenced. 10 years ago, women had only 28% savings accounts in banks. Today, 250 million Indian women have a bank account, but it's 300 million women from rural, semi-urban areas who went up to banks, gave them a business plan, got a collateral-free loan, serviced their loans, paid it back, and I'm proud today to say that when these accounts were looked at, it was found that one, NP on women-owned businesses is below 2%, NP on male-owned businesses is about 2.5%. What banks found after 10 years of research across all accounts was that a bank earns a lifetime revenue of 12% more from a female account holder as compared to men. And this is happening in India. So to deny that women sometimes, irrespective of the role of men in their families, have the capacity to take ownership is genuinely to deny evidence, which can be economically and very progressively being offered for scrutiny. How do I say this as well? I, as minister, created the world's largest nutrition tracker, which currently has 100 million beneficiaries, 25 million women who are pregnant and lactating, and 75 million kids who are under the age of 6. Supplementary nutrition, when it's given at their doorsteps, vaccination calls that are made, we do reach out to men, and men do turn up many a times. Those who don't, well, you have that challenge in geographies which are not limited to the global south. Let me contextualize it from the perspective of history in terms of the geographies that we belong to and we are currently sitting at. Back home, I have a president who's female. Back home, when I celebrate my constitution, I know it was written by 15 women. Back home, yes, I do not say we live in a utopian age, but neither does everybody else across the world. The irony is there's a presumption that if you are an educated man, you would know better. So when you talk about creating spaces where, let's say, in corporates, you will have women have a larger agency, who are the ones who are denying it? So I think the dichotomy, and I'm flummoxed by the fact that educated men who become leaders within a corporation then deny equal pay for equal work, which means for decades we were told education is the problem. Now it seems it's not.
Yeah.
And what is the reality today? We are living in the age of AI. Only 18% professionals in AI are women. 29% of all STEM-based jobs across the world are women. But look at India and look at the CEO number. We have close to 8% women who are CEOs in India. The global average is 5.6. So while we, yes, talk about what happens to a man in a family and whether he cooks for those 5 days or doesn't cook, my issue is, can we look at what we are doing right and also talk about those issues? For I recognize that there is a lot to celebrate when things go wrong, to say, oh my God, and misery will beget a lot of financial support. But the issue is, so shall I think we should put that out there. Why can't change find money for impact? Why should misery always have conferences and not positive change? So yeah, that's why I was fidgeting.
Ma'am, next question. From your vantage point in government, how can public agencies, private sector companies, and civil society groups better collaborate?
So let me give you a heads up. I'm the minister who was in charge when I not only helped write the national education policy, but when the Prime Minister of India spoke on the 15th of August in the year 2014, let's build toilets separately for girls across all schools of India, I was the person in charge. We built 400,000 plus toilets across the world, across India. But guess how many people showed up to fund it from the private sector? 99% of it was built by government. Not even 1%, 0.5% was built by somebody. I just had the last 40,000 toilets to build. I was running against time, so I called a female colleague in the private banking sector. She's now received a Padma, which is the highest civilian award in my country. Her name is Arundhati Bhattacharya. I called her in panic to say, I have 40,000 to build. And that's the networks that we need to actually talk about. I called her, she said, on it. But the presumption that the private sector will suddenly stand up and rid you of all your misery, no, it's the government, at least back home, which banks were always around in India. How come 550 million Indians not have a bank account? Lending agencies were always available in India. How come nobody thought of this methodology of doing collateral-free loans? Health institutions were always available in India. How come nobody thought of creating a network of health institutions and then creating access? How come nobody thought of creating 10,000 stores where you can get pharmacy support, where you can get a sanitary pad for 1 rupee? And why did we have to wait for 6.5 decades for that how come to happen? So I think those are the instruments. If I just looked at those who bring change, are they young? Are they men? Maybe they won't bring change. I will suffer a bias and stifle that growth. And the more we create this fissure, the more we stifle opportunities to collaborate. So yes, there is evidence that podcasts where you're telling men to change will only be heard by women. But that does not discount opportunity to have a sit down with men and have a conversation. Yes, I have a father who said the best thing you can do when I was 16 was to get married. But I don't grudge him that. I don't demonize him for it. I said, yeah, I know that. That's coming from a perspective of fear. That let my daughter just have a home and a partner who can physically protect her. I won't be around. You don't begrudge that generation that value because they didn't know better. You sit down with that generation and prove a point that yes, I'm a nobody, but I can be a somebody. And that's how you heal. That's how you bridge the gap. You don't need to light a fire everywhere, but you can light a fire only to light up a path. So I'm from the perspective, and like I said, I have lived that life. Yes, there are men who are beating down women. But is it only happening in slums? And it's only happening, let's say, in the global south? And we were told that if men are educated, they won't beat down their wives. We were told if women have a job and a check. So I think that instead of making a position very nascent, that this is the truth for all women, let's actually open it up for those women who've said, yes, I met with a challenge, but I knew how to find solutions. Yes. And then I could affect change. Maybe a role model, maybe not. But we need to recognize role models come with feet of clay.
Yeah, I think that was a very complete different
I know you got an indication from Sohani to move on, so move on.
Yeah, I'll just shift to Zubida. You bring years of grassroots experience and have seen the shifts unfold in real time. So from a civil society standpoint, how can organizations like Grameen Foundation foster support systems at home and in community that enable women to improve both health and employment outcomes?
Correct. No, thank you. And I know I'm kind of running short of time, but I appreciated everything that Ms. Rani said. You know, the mere fact that this room is majority women kind of troubles me a lot. And for decades, I've been in room talking about women and empowerment as if we have power to give women. I think the mere fact is that the world has women who are full of power. All we need to do is just get out of their way and not try to fix them. That's the role of civil society, I feel. I come from a background in mechanical engineering, and I look around and say the door that I opened this morning to enter is not designed for a woman. The chair you're sitting on, the chair I'm sitting on, is not designed for women. The world around us was meant for men and designed in a way that patriarchy was out there. And it was not just men holding patriarchy, it's women upholding that patriarchy. When I design products for women, I always think about, well, what is it? Why is this designed this way, right? I remember being in a sugarcane farm in India about 15, 20 years ago, and I would go to these women and say, how can I design a detrashing tool for you? And these women would say, we are forced to remove our uterus to come to work so that we don't have to take breaks. What can you do about it? Yeah. Right? So we never asked these women questions that needed to be. At Grameen Foundation, the biggest issue we saw was, yes, we created this microfinance movement globally, but these women were being charged higher interest rates than men. They were never given the full amount of capital that they asked for, and almost always the loan would be taken but distributed, as Rohini said beautifully, amongst the family. If you give a woman a phone, she's going to give it to her son, her daughter, her husband. She's not using that asset. How do we change that? And at Grameen, we have 3 simple approaches that we have started implementing today. The first one is what we call the household dialogues. We actually train a local agent that understands the family, the culture, the values, to go in and have a conversation within the family to say, how can we distribute power within all of you, right, including this woman? Because we know data that shows, as of by ILO as of last year, that women globally provide $16 billion of unpaid care work every single day. Every single day we are holding. And this is not an India or a US problem. If you want to understand India, read this book, Chup, by Deepa Narayan, who talks about how women are groomed to believe that they are invisible. And if you want to understand US, read the book called Holding It Together, how America is how women are America's safety net. We're actually holding with our unpaid care work America's economy in a way that we don't want to make visible and make understand. Right? So when we have this conversation, the biggest success that we saw was allowing women to sit with the family and have meals with the family at the table. And if these women are pregnant, their nutrition uptake goes up by 70%, just by the mere fact that they're sitting with the family and not eating after the family, right? When all these people understand the burden of care this woman faces before she steps out of the house and agree to do that, you know what happens? The financial institution considers her less risky, and thereby her interest rate goes down. When we talk to men, exactly, men are not bad people. Like, I'm a mother to 3 sons. I have to be cognizant of the fact, and I speak to the world about why gender is important and why role of women is important. I balance it out, but the important thing here is men feel threatened by a woman's financial independence. That's because they're groomed to believe that way. The minute you have a conversation with these men, and we've seen with 3 conversations, you can make a man understand that he has peers to support him, and that allowing a woman to bring in money is not a threat to his masculinity, because 70% of all gender-based violence and domestic violence happens because of financial reasons. Doesn't matter if it's in the US, in India, or Africa, a man is threatened by her economic independence because he's groomed and raised to believe that he's the sole provider. The minute you can dismantle that myth and enable him to have a peer and a support group that will not look down on him for supporting a woman, then he is successful. And that's our Male Champion program that's been very successful in India and Nigeria. And even in Nigeria and northern Nigeria, we are seeing polygamous marriages where men are stepping up and saying, maybe I made a mistake by having these 3 wives. Maybe I should change this in my future generation. Right? So just having conversations and understanding that we need to fix the issue and not the problem is a huge success factor. And I'll stop there. I think we really need to understand that patriarchy is rampant, that's everywhere around us. It's in, even in the jeans that we wear, it doesn't fit our mobile phones because women's jeans are designed for men. It's not designed for women, right? And so for us to understand that our everyday life needs to change and we need to show up as individuals. You don't need role models. You don't need successful people to follow. You just need to change yourself and everybody around you. And those simple changes are going to be cumulative. And the last aspect for me is AI, right? The biggest fear for me today is these biases that we hold every day are being fed into a system. And we need to act now for us to be able to leverage such a technology at scale to not just enable men or women, but to enable us as a society so we can all be successful.
Zubeda, that was really powerful. Yeah. So I'd love to open the floor to all of you if there are any questions to the panelists here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Incredible panel, and love the perspective from everybody. So I host conference for moms in India, in fact, something that has started post-COVID because I'm like, how do we make the shift? Like moms are not coming with manual, they're thrown into a system, and there's social conditioning and even including their own bias that they feed themselves that makes it challenging. So I took it upon myself. I live in Florida. I'm, by the mom of 3 boys as well. So I started the conference. And one thing that we noticed is that you were talking about men. When we put it out there in the newspaper, we had men calling, saying that, how do I send my wife there? Because, the conversation, we were talking about everything, including parenting, relationship, nutrition, getting back to workforce, pretty much covering everything because through my years, I've been mom for like 14 years now through 3 boys, and constantly I'm surrounded with moms, and those were the conversation we were having. And we're like, all right, we need a space just for moms. Now, women conversation is one thing. When you talk about mothers, they are the change maker and they are the one setting the future. So when you were talking about the next generation and, how do we make the impact, and nothing is instant. Everything is very subtle change. I feel mothers are in a position where they could create the next generation. Now, even with my 3 boys, that's the conversation we have. Because soon, the way they treat their spouse, eventually, it all starts from me, how my husband treats me, and now he's an equal partner. Now, he was born and raised outside, like he was born in London, raised here, but then I'm like, how about men in India who are being conditioned otherwise to be like, no, it's women's job to raise children. So I think that's something that I wanted to kind of add upon, and I love that such panel and such summit is really important. So I feel like how do we come together between the government, organization like yours, and everybody to have this conversation in one place? So
I think that one aspect, and just taking from what Zubeda said, in terms of technology and design flaw. As a mom, I think we need to bring out more and more attention to certain design flaws which are deadly. For instance, where it speaks about, let's say, the age of AI. In AI, and whoever uses AI for car safety in the automobile sector, they always take the body shape of men, never consider the body shape of women, especially pregnant women. And now technology, and there's a BBC report on it, which showcases that in the same circumstance, because AI doesn't take into consideration the female body type, women in the same accident are 17% more likely to die than men. So I think that certain conversations need to be acted out, and there has to be a global opinion created on them. Because one is the issue of families and moms and the role of men within those family units, equitable distribution of power, as Zubeda says. But the others are urgent red flags that need to be addressed today. Another issue with regards to moms, or for that matter, how AI relates to the same, and the agency of money. Today, 33% and less chances exist of women who are on the internet, especially on, let's say, Instagram, or any other e-commerce platform. You are more likely to get less information on investments. And you're supposed to get 70% more information on how to sell on FMCG goods. So I think that there is a need, and that impacts the everyday utility, the everyday impact of money with regards to family. Those are the red flags that need to be called out pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll pass it on to you. No, I think just one more last thing.
Hi,
Okay.
sorry. Awesome discussion. Quick question here. During the morning, we've had lots of presentations and a lot of data you shared as, I would not say the token male member, but representing mankind here. A lot of what has been shared is what we've known for years. So is academia keeping up with societal change? Because what we're looking at, we're at an inflection point where the conversation is not about how do we get women into the workplace, but in the US as the global leader economy, the big driver of change is going 30 years back. So do we think we need to do some research to understand what are the triggers, why is that happening, what are the biases? Because research right now almost feels like it's 20 years old versus where we need to be now. And I come from the private sector. To your point about AI, 0.2% of AI patents are held by women. From an investment perspective, we have an investment portfolio of about 200 companies. We had one female founder and we impaired the investment, which basically means we had to write it off. What is the gap? Why is the gap? Should we not be doing lots of research into understanding what is mostly relevant today and why societal shifts are happening now? Sorry, quick question for anybody who wants to answer.
Professor Myna,
I'll briefly say that we're lucky that our colleagues, especially in political economy and political science, are extremely motivated to figure out what's going on right now. And I think what emerges, I think, a lot from this debate is that economics and incentives are fundamental, but politics is also extremely important. And so we're fortunate that we have collaborations between all these angles. And
I also feel there's a huge disconnect anthropologically and sociologically between how the global north views academically the global south, because the templates are set by the global north. And I think that we are at a precipice of time where we can become the glue stick between the north and the south, because we have the institutions of the north and we have an understanding of the south, and that's where the answers will come from. Because if the lens is not from a perspective of understanding the diversity that we live in, if that perspective is not understood, I don't think research will throw up something new. And that is why you see the rigmarole of the old.
No, 100%. And I would like to point out to Dr. Rohini Pande, who's actually been doing amazing research, not 20 years behind, but as it stands currently today. And there is very little funding available to talk about women. And like Ms. Rani was saying, the research around kind of seat belts and airbags and how they're not meant for women, I think that's been in the last 5 years is where it hasn't even come to implementation. It's just in the research phase. So I think we're really behind in terms of understanding that we want to acknowledge that women have been treated as invisible and that we really need to bring that voice at the forefront. The more we start dismantling patriarchy as men and women in the world, the more we'll see research that is more relevant and to date. But I would say that it's still happening currently. And there are many amazing researchers doing that, but it's very recent. We're not going back to the 1960s, but we are 20 years behind because we're still understanding the presence of women and the need for it in the workforce. And that's kind of where the disconnect might seem like.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know there are more questions, but we're really running short of time. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, amazing panelists, for such deep insights into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For our first lightning showcase, I am thrilled to welcome two incredible changemakers from India, Dr. Shweta Kanavje, Director of Mahila Foundation, and Tanvi Divate, co-founder of Rani Jobs. They are on the front lines working directly with women in urban resource-poor communities, and they're here to share what it really takes to create dignified, sustainable jobs from the ground up.
Thank you, Sakshi. Namaste, everyone. I had privilege to leading Mahila Foundation operation. As you all aware, Dr. Suhani Jalota founded Mahila 10 years ago when she saw women making trade-off with their health for dignity. As an organization, whom we work with girls like Nisha, who is 20 years old, high school educated, newly married, and not able to leave her home. Figuring out with the career, finding the options for the family planning, the new responsibility of the household is confuse her to what to do next. What we do as an organization. We identify those women from the community. If those women not able to come to our place, we go to their doorstep, provide knowledge, and also providing tools on their mobile phones so she can able to access knowledge on her fingertips. Just wanted to underline, 75% of the women in the community have access to the mobile phone. This help us to, after having discussion with Mahila Foundation, this woman able to negotiate with their family members and balance their career in such a manner. And they also have a good, accurate information from the right sources, have reliable support within the community and their household, which help them to feel more control of herself and her life. We have now worked with over 2 million women like Nisha over the last decade. Our vision to increase women agency, they're able to make decisions to ensure women are more confident, financially independent and healthy. But we don't just work with women. We also work with their husbands, fathers and brothers. We leverage our deep-rooted presence in the community we serve to create and train local champions and foster male support within the community for women. These male allies are now strong champions for their wives and even helping other men to understand their perspective. Over the next decade, we are on mission to empower 35 million women in the urban slum across India. We use research-backed, technology-driven approach to creating systematic change in women agency. While we are developing the agency tool, we also measure the impact on women health-seeking behavior by tracking increased utilization of healthcare services and higher labor-seeking behavior by tracking increased female labor force participation. Research shows that women are strong, but due to gender and social biases, they often denied chance to realize their full potential. To transform this reality, holistic approach should be needed. And that's what Mahila does. We have Women Agency Program. We create a safe, supportive environment where women are encouraged to speak, just like a chatty Myna bird. We have on-ground program like physical spaces and digital platform, which we run ground. Through this program, we run ground clinic and center within the community, mobile application and AI-based chatbot on WhatsApp for women to manage their sexual reproductive health confidently and efficiently. We have recently launched AI innovations and academic research vertical. Myna research provides understanding about the magnitude of the problem, scale of the challenges through randomized control trial, guide program design, and help us to collaborate with meaningful potential leaders to derive a systematic change. We have been fortunate to have been supported by many partners in this work, like Data.org, the Agency Fund, the Gate Foundation, MIT Sol, many more. This research and implementation integrated approach has been instrumental in Myna's growth and impact. But none of this possible without dedicated team member. We have 75 plus team member which have background in technology, health, grassroots expertise in implementation. It is truly honor to represent Mahila Foundation work on this global platform and share the work we are to create a more equitable future for women.
To continue on and moving along the day, we have Tanvi Divate next, co-founder of Rani Jobs.
Hi everyone, very good morning. My name is Tanvi Divate, and at Rani Work, we are building a platform for women, one that reimagines flexible work to be more inclusive, dignified, and future-ready. Through our conversation with employers, we have consistently heard the same challenges, that hiring full-time employees is difficult, retention is very low, and there's a persistent mismatch between available talent and the skill sets that companies actually need. Rani is here to solve that. Rani is a workforce platform powering inclusive AI and digital work. We connect companies with trained women who can deliver a wide range of tasks from digital, AI-enabled work to back-end and human-in-the-loop operations. Companies get access to reliable, on-demand talent pool, not needing to worry about the delays and cost of hiring full-time people. What makes our workforce unique is that it's gender balanced, multilingual, and trained, which means that data is more precise and model gets less biased. And we're not just doing the usual micro tasks. Our workers handle complex workflows like prompt engineering, red teaming, and quality assurance. Because it's all built on mobile-first platform, Rani is designed to scale, making it easy to onboard women, upskill them, and keep them engaged for long term. Our system is simple and scalable. Companies upload tasks and set quality parameters. Rani then breaks them into gamified micro-tasks and pushes them through the app. Workers complete the work via smartphones or PC desktops. And built-in QA methods ensures that there is consistent accuracy maintained. Workers are then paid fairly based on completion and performance. Rani's women have already taken on a wide range of industry-specific tasks. In healthcare, for example, they have generated language data sets, trained as AI health counselors, and even supported advanced tasks like red teaming, prompt engineering for health models. And in retail and e-commerce, they have worked on product sentiment analysis, tagging, and categorization, all crucial that has been all crucial for understanding consumer behavior. On the tech and the backend side, they have done QA testing, backend data entry, multilingual transcription, and even app and website testing. And in the development sector, they have gone hyperlocal, doing door-to-door surveys, field data collection, training chatbots in regional languages. We know that flexibility matters, so we package work into short, manageable hours that fit into their daily lives. This platform is exclusively for women, supported by local digital hubs that are built in their local communities, and also having trained AI-assisted job counselors who help them navigate any challenges. We have seen strong results across different client work. They have delivered around 98% accuracy in data annotation projects, and about 70% of the women who start the task actually finish it completely. And that's a big deal, especially in gig work, where the drop-offs is really high. And in one of our chatbot projects, the quality has gotten a 35% engagement rate, both due to bot localization and also having AI-assisted health counselors. For every Rani worker that we have 5x women on the wait list, ready, trained, and eager to start. This shows that there's a huge untapped labor supply potential. We are not just solving a hiring problem. We are creating a pathway for women to gradually enter and grow in the workforce. Many of the women we work with are entering paid work for the first time. So we have designed a step-by-step journey that helps them grow at their own pace. At level 1, they start with simple, low-barrier, flexible tasks they can do from home or within their community. And as they build trust and consistency, they move into quality-related work, such as reviewing tasks, testing chatbots, and doing some validation work. And in level 3, with more experience, they are ready for more complex and also field-based roles, like surveys, red teaming, and prompt engineering. And finally, they graduate into larger ecosystems, whether that's platform like Upwork or more offline work, and stay long-term. This model gives women the freedom to balance home responsibilities with career goals while building skills, confidence, and income over time. So join us in reshaping the future of work and building more inclusive workforce together. Thank you.